Welcome. This is the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast. This is where you'll learn strategies to help you achieve lifetime financial freedom through real estate investment. Your host, Rod Cleef, has owned over 2,000 homes and apartments, and he brings experts in all aspects of real estate investment and management onto the show. Now, here's your host, Rod Cleef.
Welcome to Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing. I'm Rod Cleef, and I'm thrilled you're here. And before we get to our awesome guest, I want to mention one quick thing, and that is if you like what you hear on this show, be sure to hit the subscribe button on iTunes. That way you never miss another show. All right, let's get this party started. I know you're going to get incredible value from the guy we're interviewing today. His name is Joe Fairless. He's a very successful multifamily real estate investor. In fact, he controls over $54 million worth of multifamily real estate. Started out in single family and is obviously now kicking butt in multifamily. He's also a fellow podcaster. His podcast is called The Best Real Estate Investing Advice Ever. Great podcast. And he has the distinction of being the longest running daily real estate podcast on iTunes. And he's a great guy. Joe, thanks for being on the show, buddy.
My pleasure, Rod. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, so, I know you've probably said it a million times, but give us a little idea of how you got into multifamily from single family.
From multifamily to single family, basically, I put together a goal sheet, and whenever I was looking at my goals, I realized that I'd have to buy like 100 homes in order to reach my financial goals of what I was looking for. And instead of doing that, and I had purchased some homes at that point, and I was like, man, it takes a decent amount of time and focus to find the property and to buy it, and now I'm getting like $250 a month income from it, which is nice, but you just have to stack a lot of those on top of one another in order to reach some big numbers. So as a result, I realized it was time to go larger. Simultaneously, I had become unfulfilled in my advertising agency job. I was the youngest vice president of a New York City advertising agency, but just wasn't digging it anymore. And because of that, I decided, okay, if I leave, then I won't be able to buy any single-family homes the traditional way that I've been buying them. Therefore, I'm going to need to figure out how can I creatively get in deals. And once I left advertising, I could not get approved for a $80,000 house, but I could put together a deal for a $7 million apartment community.
Oh, I love that.
The irony is thick. So I ended up pursuing that.
I hope you guys heard that. It doesn't take income to put these deals together. It takes resourcefulness and knowledge. Well, let's talk about that first deal, because I heard one of your other interviews, and I was really impressed with how you structured that first, I believe it was a 168-unit property that you bought literally 6 months after you got started.
Yep.
Is that correct? Yep. So talk to us about that deal, because you did something unique there that I want my listeners to hear.
I did a master lease with option to purchase, which I suspect is the unique component that you're referring to.
No question.
Yeah.
In fact, and I'll be candid, it's something I have not done, so know very little about. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Basically, you're doing a lease option. Yep. I've done 1,000 of those on single-family homes, but you're doing a lease option on the property, on the whole complex. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it's a fairly complex document that makes that happen. I think I overheard on the other interview that after you took it down, even though it was an option, you got the benefit of any principal reduction on the existing debt. Now talk about why you use this as a formula for this particular property, because I think it's real relevant with all the CMBS loans that are coming due right now.
I completely agree. And the reason why I used it on that property is because there was a large prepayment penalty on it.
Right. It's called defeasance, and that's a fancy word for prepayment penalty, big one.
Yep, defeasance. Also, and technically it's a yield maintenance, which my mortgage broker educated me on. There is a difference between defeasance and a yield maintenance, but for all intents and purposes, there's a fee.
You pay to pay off. Bottom line is you pay a lot of money to pay the loan off. So if somebody's looking at a few $100,000 or even over $1 million in a prepayment penalty, defeasance, yield deficiency, whatever it is, that can really impact a sale. And if they have to sell, maybe that was the case here. So go on. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you.
Yeah, there was $1 million prepayment penalty on the property. Wow. We'll just call it that.
Wow.
Because there's $1 million prepayment penalty, the seller couldn't just sell it outright because someone would have to pay that fee. Now there's also it could be assumed, but the loan wasn't very good, and the loan assumption fees, and just didn't make sense to assume the loan. Therefore, there's another option, which is, as you said, it's basically a lease option, but right. It's called master lease with option to purchase with apartment communities. Otherwise, or other states, it might be known as a land contract.
Right, installment land contract,
installment sale. Right, there's a couple different things.
So guys, just for those of you listening, basically what it means is you are buying the property effectively subject to the debt that's on there. You're going to continue to pay the underlying debt. Now, the vehicle, I'm using the word vehicle. The paperwork that you use to accomplish this could be called these other things. It could be done with a lease option document, a very comprehensive one, not like the stuff we did on the single-family homes, very comprehensive, or an installment land contract. But typically, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the deed of the property held in escrow by somebody else, so the seller can't screw with you if you deliver on what you promise? Yeah.
We, for all intents and purposes, we control the property.
Right.
We can exercise the option whenever we want to exercise the option. It would be in our best interest to exercise it over a period of time when the prepayment penalty has decreased and we've increased the NOI on the property, because essentially what we're doing is we're agreeing to pay, and I'll use real numbers because it'll be a lot easier to explain. We have an option to purchase the property at $6.35 million. Okay. And the day we closed on it in July of 2013, it appraised for $6.7 million. So if we just hold serve on this property, meaning we don't increase the NOI, we just keep operating it as it's
business as usual,
as it's going now, or as it was going then what we'll do is we'll have some equity both in that difference, that spread of 6.35 to 6.7, but then also, as you mentioned, we receive the principal paydown on the property or on the mortgage. So every month there's $15,000 that goes towards our equity, because that's the principal that we're reducing the loan by $15,000 in principal every single month. Right. So you combine that principal paydown with the equity that we have going into the deal, plus the reduction in the prepayment penalty, and eventually that goes away, and you've got yourself a pretty good deal.
How? By the way, just out of curiosity, when does that go away on this particular deal?
It goes away. It coincides with the end of the master lease, which also coincides with when their note is due, which is about 4.5 years.
Okay. Total. Have you been able to do anything to improve the NOI yet, or has it just kind of been coasting along the way you bought it?
It's improved slightly.
Okay.
The business plan, my business plan has become more sophisticated since my first deal. But then two, the business plan going into it was really to do what I just mentioned, and I didn't raise money for a large renovation project. It was simply to hold serve, and then how we've benefited just by luck also is because cap rates have decreased, which then increases the value of the property.
Right. Oh, that is very lucky. Where's this one located?
This one's in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Cincinnati, good market. Okay, so just out of curiosity, what kind of money did you have to put down on this deal to entice the seller to believe that you're a real deal and you were going to perform?
The down payment was $1.2 million. I personally raised $843,000 from 12 different investors. The difference between 1.2 and 843,000 is the brokers put in their commission. of $317,500, and they became 25% owners with us on the deal, and then there were some prorations that were credited towards us in the down payment.
Wow. So, guys, I hope you heard that. That was a very creative strategy that he used. He got the brokers to participate. They got a big chunk of the deal, but, effectively, their participation was about 25% of the downstroke. So, very creative. I've done that myself in the past many times. So that's awesome. So you raised $1 million, a little over $1 million on this one. Tell us about the next one. What you did differently?
Well, I waited 2 years. And I think that's important because from an outsider looking in, I suspect people think that I've risen quickly, but and perhaps I have from a macro level. But I think it's important to note that I bought or I took control. Because technically, I still don't own the 168 units. We have an option to buy it.
No, you're very precise in how you talk about it. Some people might brag and say they own it, and technically you don't.
Yeah,
so that's good.
I took control of it in July of 2013, and it wasn't until August of 2015 that I closed on my next deal, and that is a 250 unit apartment community in Houston.
Okay.
And then.
So what was the structure on that one, if I might ask? Was it another master lease option, or was it just a straight purchase?
Everything else has been a straight purchase, and I'm glad that you asked that because a lot of people ask me, "Oh wow," or they mention, "Hey, that was really creative on your first deal. I bet you try to do that a lot." And the answer to that is no, I don't. What I try to do is find out what's the best solution to the problem that the seller has.
Right.
And it's important to have the master lease education in our back pocket so that we can, bring it out when relevant. In particular, right now, when a lot of people the interest rates are low, so a lot of people have probably taken advantage of that, put on new debt, and if they have new debt on it and then a life circumstance happens, well, they've got a prepayment penalty. And what are they going to do? They want out, but they've got this nice loan on the property, but they just got it, so they're kind of stuck. Well, not if you know the master lease with option to purchase strategy, because then you can have a solution to their problems. But it's
great tool to have in the tool belt for sure.
But as far as the 250 units, as well as so that was August of 2015, and then about 6 months later, we bought 155 units, and then 2 months after that, bought a 320 unit in Dallas, Texas. Wow. And those have all been traditional purchases. What the business plan is that it's a value add play, but it's stabilized when we buy it, and then we put in money and we increase the rents through renovations, and we put a bridge loan on it for the first 24 months. While we're doing the improvements, then we exit out of the bridge loan, put long-term financing on it, and then the projection for the period of time we'll have the property is in total 5 years. We'll sell it at that time.
I see. So you buy to sell.
Yes.
So that's your strategy. Now, let's back up for a minute. Now, has the bridge loan strategy been your strategy on all of the other properties, or just this last one that you did in Houston or Dallas?
All of them. So we bought a 250 unit in Houston, a 155 unit in Houston, a 320 unit in Dallas. Those three, it was the same formula: bridge loan to long-term financing, and then exit out in 5 years.
What kind of loan to value did you get on your bridge loans? Did it fluctuate, or do you have like an average?
I'd say about 78%.
Okay, which is great. Okay, so 78%, and then you raised equity from private investors, and for the remainder of that. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about how you raise equity?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's actually fairly strategic. Whenever I first got started, I was not thinking through it methodically like I do now, and from a high level, I make friendships. That's what I'm focused on. If you were to come across me and we were introduced by mutual friends and we had dinner, I would not be talking about my business. I just want to talk about what you care about, as well as if you ask me what I got going on, I'll tell you. But the focus of the conversation isn't going to be around my business. It's going to be around stuff that we all enjoy talking about. So I'm not someone who pitches. I think that's a backwards approach. I think my motto is the secret to living is giving. That's a Tony Robbins saying that he mentioned in a TED Talk.
Sure.
And so strategically now that I mentioned kind of my philosophy, strategically what I do is I have a spreadsheet. And in that spreadsheet, I've got different columns. One column is first name, the other is last name. The other one is amount that they have invested, if they've invested with me previously. Another is amount that I think they could invest. And it has city, state, address, and miscellaneous notes. But here's one other column it has, and this is an important thing I want to mention. How we met. Because I want to know how I'm meeting these investors and potential investors. Therefore, I can be smarter about surrounding myself with the right people who have an inclination to buy apartment communities with me and share in the profits. Now, tactically, when you look at the different networks, so and I actually did an analysis on this with my own networks, and I saw where the referrals are coming from and where the big cities are, the cities that my investors are in. And what I recommend for everyone listening, take a look at each of your networks. So I'll use one of my networks. It's the Texas Tech Alumni Advisory Board. I've been a board member for Texas Tech's College of Media and Communication for about, 7-8 years. And I have gotten to know people really well because I go to Lubbock, Texas every single year to attend this meeting. Well, when I'm speaking to someone about my business or if I have a particular deal, and I talk to them and they're interested, then I ask them, hey, can I mention to so-and-so that we talked and you think they'd be interested too? And it will be someone that we both know most of the time. And they'll say, yeah, sure. Well, when I name check that individual to this new individual, it builds the connection much faster for the deal for my business than it would if I was going in cold. And I saw that play out right before my eyes on my very first deal, and it was my largest investor. My largest investor knew another investor in the deal. He's like, hey, so-and-so told me about the deal that you've already reached out to me on. I know he's really smart with his money. I'm sure I'd love to take a look too.
Right. No, absolutely. The key to these relationships is building rapport. And if you get an introduction or are able to use a name they're familiar with, that's kind of a no-brainer. And the other thing you're alluding to, really in the communication with these potential investors, is read the book How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's all about letting them talk about themselves. Don't be talking about yourself unless you're asked, of course, and really going in there with the mindset of a relaxed friendship, and you'll really be more successful than if you're trying to be slick and talk about your deal right out of the gate. So those very, very good advice. Very good advice. So, what do you see in the future for yourself, Joe? What's you're still in acquisition mode? Yeah, absolutely. I see a couple things. I mean, from a high level, the way I make the most of my money is from buying and selling apartment communities with investors and sharing in the profits. So I will continue to do that. How I feed that is, you need money, you need deals. My podcast, as you mentioned at the beginning, it's the world's longest daily real estate podcast, and through that podcast, I build relationships with people, both people who have off-market deals, who they send me off-market deals, and I help them get the off-market deals sold, or I buy them. And also the investors, people who listen to my podcasts, they reach out to me, we jump on some calls, we get to know each other, and then they eventually invest in my deals. So
as far as what's next for me, it's pretty much doing the same stuff I'm doing, but continuing to scale it. So what I mean by that is, as a marketer, I mean, my professional background before I got into real estate full time, as I mentioned, I was the youngest VP of a New York City ad agency, and I used those skills to apply to my real estate stuff, and it's worked out pretty well. And one tip I have, and this is what I do, I look at distribution channels. iTunes is a huge distribution channel, therefore I created a podcast, and no one's crazy enough to do a daily podcast as long as I have, so now I can say it's the world's longest in real estate investing.
Right.
Now I also saw another distribution channel, which is Amazon, that I wasn't on. Therefore, I wrote a book, and it's being released right now. It was personally endorsed by Barbara Corcoran. She recommends the book. And now, that book's launching, and that's going to be a whole nother wave of exposure and building the machine. So,
what's the title of the book, Joe?
You're going to wonder where I came up with it. You ready?
Oh, this will be... Go ahead.
It's called The Best Real Estate Investing Advice Ever, Volume 1.
So not only did you write an incredibly valuable book, you're cross-marketing your podcast, and you're basically branding yourself with it as well. That's very, very smart. Well, good for you. Good for you. So, guys, I'm sure the book is fantastic. I will definitely get it when it comes out, so I recommend it to any of you that are listening. So I've got a couple more fundamental questions because you're obviously very successful at this. Tell me what you have as far as a team. Not in your podcasting and your writing, obviously I'm sure that's mostly just you, but the team that you put together to buy these properties and take them down and manage them. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, well, it's myself and my business partner.
Okay.
I am focused on the money, bringing money, and marketing and investor relations. He is focused on underwriting and asset management. We overlap, but those are each of our primary responsibilities. He has experience doing the underwriting and asset management from an institutional level. So, I don't have that skill set to the degree that he has it, and vice versa on what I do. Other than that, we've got an admin who helps with DocuSign stuff and things like that. We have someone actually in Cincinnati with me, and he's responsible for looking for off-market deals in Cincinnati, as well as he helps me with my content creation. And then from a property level, we hire a third-party property management company for our deals, and in some cases we partner with them and bring them in on the general partnership with us.
Interesting. And speak to why you would do that.
Pros and cons.
Okay.
Let's talk about the cons first.
Okay.
The con is when you bring a property management company into the fold, into the deal with you as a general partner. If they suck, then you're stuck with them as general partners. Now, you should always have a clause in the operating agreement that says if you're doing poorly, we can fire you, and we do. And there's a couple exceptions like, market conditions or, undercapitalization on the property, whatever it is. But if it's their fault, then we can fire you. However, even if we fire them, well, they're still in on the general partnership, and so we still have a relationship with them. So there's the con. It's important. I think it's always important to look at both sides. Now here are the pros. One, you have an incredible alignment of interests with them, especially if they're bringing their own money into the deal, and then especially if they're raising money from their investors and bringing their own money into the deal, which is what we're doing in all those Texas properties that I mentioned. The 320 units, 155, and the 250. We partnered with a property management company. They invested in the deals alongside with us and our investors, and they brought their own investors into the deal. So lots of checks and balances there.
Yeah, no, that actually makes sense. And people that have listened to me before, I'm a big proponent for managing your own property. And, my first interview was a billionaire with 35,000 units that manages his own property. And I've just always managed my own stuff, even when I had, 800 houses, which is a management nightmare. But, the way you just described your relationship, that is an exception to my position for sure. If they're putting money in, if they have an active interest like that and they're helping you raise money, I'd do that deal in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. So very, very shrewd. And that takes it off your plate as well, which certainly has a big advantage. So let me ask you this. Do you have any mentors, Joe?
Yeah, I do. I've paid mentors, and I have a business coach right now. So I've paid real estate mentors, 2 of them. One taught me single-family home stuff that I didn't ever apply. It was like wholesaling and lease. Maybe I did eventually. It was lease option, but on single-family homes. So maybe like subconsciously I learned that and then applied later. And then other things. But what that first mentor helped me with was just having a broad perspective on different options and opportunities. Because at the time I was just buying 20% down payment, $80,000 house, make $200. So that's one. And then I learned everything I thought I could from him, and then I moved on. And then another helped teach me multifamily, learned everything I thought I could from him, and then I moved on. And now what I have is a business/life coach through the Tony Robbins program.
No kidding. Yep, good for you.
And I've been working with him for over 3 years now, and he actually gave me the recommendation to start a podcast.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I've had Tony coaches for years. I've been involved with his technology for 16 years, and was just at his event in Dallas a couple weeks ago, and I've been working in that environment for a very, very long time. In fact, that leads right into my next question. I don't know. I also do a weekly clip called Your Driving Force Success Tip, where I talk about goal setting, visualization, mentors, motivation, things of that nature. So I always like to ask, where do you get your drive, Joe? What makes you jump out of bed in the morning?
Death. We're all going to die, so live accordingly.
Oh, I love it. I mean, that's a good answer.
It's basically what it boils down to. People who get caught up in the small stuff of life, which basically anything small, unless you're literally about to die, I think they think they're going to live forever.
Right.
So when I keep, and by the way, it is an ongoing exercise for me. It's not completely hardwired in me yet.
Oh, sure. It isn't everybody.
So it's something that I have to continually remind myself and exercise and practice. But really, you're going to die. I'm going to die. Everyone listening on this podcast listening to the podcast is going to die. So why don't we spend the time that we have and enjoy it? Find empowering meanings behind everything that happens, and do what we can to help ourselves out and help others out. Right.
Agree completely. So, last question. Well, actually, I've got two more. What words of wisdom would you share with someone thinking about getting into the multifamily space? What tip would you give them?
Well, if you're thinking about getting into it, it depends on your background. I would say, from a high level, read a bunch of books. One of them I recommend is The Complete Guide to Buying and Selling Apartment Communities by Steve Burgess. There are many others, but that's one. And in fact, if you email me, info@joefairless, info@joefairless.com, and just mention you heard me on Rod's podcast, then I will email you a resources guide with a bunch of different free websites and books and podcasts that I recommend going to, reading, and listening to, respectively.
Oh, that's a great resource, and we'll make sure that we put that in the show notes as well. Fantastic. Now, I'd like you to share a war story and a victory story from your multifamily investing career. It's a war story where you really got bloodied, got your butt kicked, and what the takeaway might be, and then a victory story.
Well, the war story, there's a lot of them. Two of them come to mind, and both of them are on the first property, the 168 units. One is know the difference between economic occupancy and physical occupancy. I did not realize there was a difference. I just thought it was occupancy. Well, there's a problem because physical occupancy, people who are living there and on the rent roll. Economic occupancy is people who are living there on the rent roll and
actually paying.
That's important.
Wow.
It's important that people pay rent and not just live there. I realized that on my first property. It took me a little bit to figure that out.
Ouch.
And then the other is I've interviewed over 700 people on my podcast. So I get exposure to a lot of different business models, a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different stories. And here's the deal. When you are undercapitalized on a property, you're going to run into trouble. If you consistently undercapitalize on properties, you're going to be bankrupt. And on my first deal, the 168 units, I undercapitalized the deal. I was ignorant, and I only raised enough money to close the deal. I didn't have a contingency fund. I didn't have an operating budget or operating fund, and I didn't have any money raised for the
CapEx.
CapEx. Yep, I was stupid. And I was working with people at the time, my multifamily people, but for some reason we all let that slip through the cracks. I ultimately blame myself for it.
No, that happens. Many people have done that.
And so as far as the burn came from me putting my own money into the deal. I've never done a capital call, and I don't foresee ever a scenario where I would do a capital call. And capital call is where you go back to the investors with your hand out and be like, hey, I know I said we need to put this money into the property, and you did that, but now other stuff happened. We need this. I won't ever do that.
Right.
So I put my own money into it and made it work. But those are the two things, physical versus economic occupancy, and don't undercapitalize your project. And you might be thinking, not you, Rod, because you know this, but anyone listening might be thinking, well, what specifically do you need to do? Well, the three categories that are usually missed, I mentioned CapEx.
By the way, let me just tell my listeners, those of you who don't know what CapEx is you need to have a contingency fund for when HVAC goes out, when your roof needs to be replaced, when your parking lot needs to be refinished. These are big capital expenditures. That's what CapEx means. I'm sorry, please continue.
Yep, CapEx, contingency fund. So if you are doing something that you planned on doing and it goes over, then there's your contingency fund, and also an operating budget so that when you do pay all your vendors and the first of the month rolls around and you got to pay a mortgage for, in my case, $40,000, you've got money to let that float until all of your rents come in. So it's important to have those three things. And as far as the amounts for those three things, because that would be the next natural question that your listeners might have, it varies depending on the deal. So you really got to look at each deal and what the property's status is, or where its life cycle is, and where you're taking it as far as your business plan.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. With financing, they're going to require a CapEx escrow.
Yeah, they're going to require $250 per unit per year.
Right. Which you didn't have that luxury with that first deal because you bought it subject to the existing debt, so you didn't have that requirement. Let me rephrase that. But in the future deals, you're forced to have something for CapEx. And your note about being able to pay the mortgage payment, you've got to make sure you've got enough funds to operate, and not just the bare minimum. You've got to make sure that you've got some money in the bank so that you've got a float.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
As far as the good stuff, I would say every purchase so far even that first one has turned out well. But again, it's relatively early because the second deal I did, the 250 units, that was about a year ago. So it's still relatively early. So I would say the best deal that I've done so far has been bringing on my business partner, because he's able to focus on the underwriting, and I'm able to focus on what I'm good at, and it's been, we're both elevating each other as a result of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I've been interviewing myself for somebody that could fit that bill at a macro level, a much higher level, and that kind of a synergy is fantastic when you've got somebody doing what you're doing with the investor relations and someone else more analytical, possibly doing the deal analysis and management. That's a great match. A great match actually in most businesses. Period. Not just the one we're in. Mm-hmm. Well, listen. Really enjoyed this, Joe. You've been a great resource, and it's been fantastic. So I appreciate you being on the show, and good luck in all that you do. I'm sure that we'll be in touch with each other.
Well, thanks a lot, Rod. And we did mention you mentioned you're getting the book, so I'd like to offer you and then anyone else who buys the book to email me the receipt from Amazon. And I'll give you a bonus guide, which actually lists out a bunch of the best ever deals that my guests have done. So lots of inspiration from those deals and a lot of takeaways, a lot of good case studies. So if you email me the receipt once you buy the book, and you just Google or search my name in Amazon, Joe Fairless, and the book will pop up. And the email is info@joefairless.com, and we'll get you that bonus guide.
No, that's awesome, and that'll be in the show notes as well. That's awesome, and I'll certainly be buying it myself. And by the way, I don't recall if I heard you mention that all the proceeds are going to a charity, and to me that's fantastic because that's dear to my heart as well.
Yep. All the proceeds are going to junior achievement to help kids in underserved communities learn financial literacy skills and entrepreneurship skills.
Doesn't get any better than that. All right, buddy. You take care. Thanks for being on the show.
All right. Thanks, Rod.
Thank you for listening to the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe and then take a moment to visit iTunes and leave a 5-star rating and review. For more resources to connect with us further, please visit our website at lifetimecashflowpodcast.com. Tune in next week for our next show.